The strange truth is that early human groups may not have stayed together because life was peaceful. They may have stayed together because leaving was even more dangerous. A person could be angry, jealous, tired, or treated unfairly, yet still remain near the same fire, the same voices, the same faces, not because everyone loved each other, but because hunger, cold, fear, and silence were waiting outside the group. So what held them together, when every human heart already carried reasons to walk away? If we picture an early human group as a circle of warmth around a fire, it is easy to imagine harmony. We may imagine people sitting close together, sharing food without complaint, caring for children without resentment, and moving through a dangerous world as if closeness came naturally. But a human group was not held together because every person inside it was gentle, patient, and fair. It was held together while people were hungry, tired, afraid, and sometimes angry with one another. That is the first quiet truth behind this question. A group could be necessary and difficult at the same time. It could protect a person from the dark, but also trap that same person near the face of someone who had taken more meat, spoken harshly, refused help, or received more attention than others. Long before written law, long before villages, long before chiefs with stored grain or walls around settlements, people still had to face the old problem of living beside other minds. A small band moving through a landscape of stone, grass, trees, rain, dry seasons, animals, and uncertain food was not a peaceful dream. It was a living arrangement under pressure. Each person brought needs into the group. Each person wanted safety, food, rest, warmth, touch, respect, and some sense that others would not abandon them when weakness came. But those needs did not always fit neatly together. One person's hunger could meet another person's suspicion. One person's fear could become control. One person's skill could create pride, and pride could disturb the balance around the fire. So when we ask what kept early human groups from falling apart, we should not begin by imagining that they were naturally united. We should begin by imagining how easily they might have broken. A missed share of food, a careless insult, a child crying too long at night, a hunter returning empty-handed, while another returned with praise, an older person slowing the group when the weather changed, a young person wanting more freedom than the elders allowed. These were not small things in a world where survival depended on attention. In a modern life, a conflict can be hidden behind walls, schedules, money, distance, and private rooms. In a small early group, there was very little distance. People slept near one another. They heard the same coughs, saw the same wounds, smelled the same smoke, watched who reached first for food, and remembered who looked away when help was needed. The origin of human togetherness was not born in comfort. It was shaped in places where other people were both shelter and strain. This matters because early human social life cannot be explained only by kindness. Kindness mattered, but it was not the whole structure. Cooperation could grow out of need, memory, habit, kinship, shared danger, and the simple fact that one human body alone was not enough for many tasks. Yet the same closeness that made cooperation possible also made conflict unavoidable. If a group waited near a water source, everyone had to negotiate space. If a carcass, fruit patch, tubers, shellfish, eggs, or gathered plants came into camp, everyone had to face the question of who would receive what. If someone was injured, others had to decide how much weight weakness should carry. If someone became too demanding, too violent, too proud, or too selfish, the group had to respond without destroying itself. This is why the story is more delicate than a simple tale of ancient friendship. Early people did not need to be perfect companions to remain together. They only needed enough ways to keep tension from becoming final separation. Maybe someone looked away for a while. Maybe someone walked with another relative. Maybe a complaint was spoken softly. Maybe laughter reduced a sharp edge. Maybe food was shared not with joy, but because tomorrow the giver might be empty-handed. Maybe people stayed close because the cold outside the circle was stronger than the anger within it. In that sense, the early group was not a symbol of pure harmony. It was a fragile agreement repeated day after day. Stay near, share enough, remember enough. Do not push too far, do not leave too soon. The fire could warm everyone, but it could not erase envy, grief, fear, or pride. And still, somehow, many groups endured long enough for children to grow, skills to pass on, and stories to be remembered. The mystery is not that early humans sometimes fought. The mystery is that, under so much pressure, they kept finding reasons not to let the group break completely. The tensions that could loosen an early human group did not always have to look large. They did not need to begin with open violence, a dramatic betrayal, or a clear enemy inside the camp. Often, the strain may have begun in smaller places, almost too ordinary to notice. Someone reached for food before others had eaten. Someone kept a useful tool longer than expected. Someone returned from gathering with less than people hoped. Someone spoke in a careless tone after a long day of walking. In a small group, these little moments could matter because there was no true hiding place. The same people who saw a mistake in the morning might sleep near the same fire at night. The person who felt ignored today might be the person whose help was needed tomorrow. This is where the question of why groups did not fall apart becomes more difficult. The group was not only challenged by danger outside it, it was also challenged by the human mind inside it. Hunger changes how people hear one another. Cold makes patience thinner. Long movement across dry ground, wet ground, snow or forest can make a small disappointment feel heavier. If a hunter failed, the failure was not private. If a patch of plants was smaller than expected, the shortage was not private. If a child cried through the night, tiredness spread through bodies lying nearby. Early human groups lived close enough for one person's need to become everyone's atmosphere. The origin of group tension was not only selfishness. It was also the pressure of sharing the same fragile conditions. Food must have been one of the most sensitive points, because food was not constant. A successful day could be followed by an empty one. Meat, roots, fruit, nuts, eggs, honey, shellfish, fish, or gathered greens would not appear evenly. And not every person could produce the same amount at the same time. Some were skilled, some were injured, some were young, some were old, some were pregnant or nursing, and some simply had bad luck. In such a world, every portion carried more than calories. It carried memory. Who received first? Who was overlooked? Who gave without being asked? Who held back? A group could not avoid these questions, because the body asked them before the mouth did. The stomach noticed before any rule was spoken. But if food created tension, it also made people watch one another with unusual care. No written account from the deep past tells us exactly what one early band said over a meal, yet studies of small-scale foraging societies remind us that sharing can be practical, social, and emotionally loaded at the same time. It can reduce risk, but it can also create resentment, expectation, obligation, and quiet judgment. That means the group lived under a constant social weather. Not a storm every day, but a pressure in the air. Another source of strain was attention. Humans do not only need food, they need to know where they stand. In a small early group, status did not need a crown or a throne to exist. It could appear in who was listened to, who was trusted with a child, who was laughed at, who was believed after a dispute, or who was quietly avoided. Even in a group that tried to keep people from rising too far above others, difference would still be felt. A skilled tracker might receive respect. A generous person might be remembered warmly. A dangerous or selfish person might be watched. A young adult might feel ready to be treated as more than a child. An older person might fear becoming a burden. None of these feelings had to become open conflict, but each could become a fine crack inside the group. This is why early togetherness was never just a matter of bodies staying close. Minds had to stay close enough not to split beyond repair. People had to read glances, tones, pauses, silences, and small changes in behavior. Attention could soothe, but it could also wound. So the danger of falling apart did not always arrive like a sudden break. It could gather quietly through repeated small unfairness, repeated embarrassment, repeated hunger, repeated pride, or repeated neglect. So the early group was not held together by a simple feeling of love. It was held together while pressure moved through it like wind through dry grass. A person could need the group and resent the group at the same time. A woman carrying a child could depend on others for food, but still feel the weight of other people's judgment. A young man could want respect, yet feel watched whenever he failed. An older person could hold memories that mattered, yet wonder whether slower feet made others impatient. A child could be everyone's concern and everyone's burden. These were not modern emotions placed falsely into the deep past. They are ordinary human tensions, and they become sharper when people live close, depend on one another, and cannot easily disappear into private life. In a small, early human group, there may have been no written rule saying who was valuable, who owed help, who had gone too far, or who had been unfair. But the group still had eyes, it still had memory, it still had repeated contact, and repeated contact can become its own kind of pressure. If someone acted selfishly once, perhaps it passed. If the same person did it again, people remembered. If someone always gave, people remembered that too. If a quarrel happened, it did not vanish when the sun went down, because the same faces were still nearby the next morning. This is one reason the question is so quiet and so serious. What kept early human groups from falling apart was not only some grand invention, not only language, not only food sharing, not only fear of the outside world. Before we can understand any of those things, we have to understand the problem they were answering. The problem was closeness. Human beings had to live close enough to survive, but not so close that anger, pride, hunger, jealousy, and shame destroyed the fragile circle. The group had to absorb small injuries without letting every injury become a permanent break. It had to let people remain after disappointment. It had to leave room for a person to be angry today and useful tomorrow. That may sound simple, but in the early human world it was a deep social task. A group that lost too many members could lose hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, watchers, carriers, healers, grandparents, playmates, and future mates. A person who left alone might lose warmth, information, protection, and help during sickness. So the pressure worked in both directions. The group could hurt the individual, but the world outside the group could hurt even more. The individual could burden the group, but losing that individual could also weaken the group. This double truth may be one of the oldest roots of human social life. People stayed together not because staying was easy, but because separation carried a cost that the body could understand. Yet cost alone was not enough. Fear can keep people near for a while, but fear by itself does not build a lasting pattern. Something else had to soften the hard edges. A shared meal, a familiar voice, a remembered favor, a child sleeping safely between adults, a joke after tension, a walk beside someone after silence, a small act of repair that did not need to be named as repair. These moments were not decorations around survival. They may have been part of survival itself. The early group did not need to become perfect. It needed to become flexible. It needed to bend before it snapped. It needed ways for anger to cool, for unfairness to be noticed, for pride to be lowered, for need to be answered, and for memory to warn without turning everyone into an enemy. This is why the first answer cannot be simple. If we ask why early human groups did not fall apart, we are really asking how fragile beings learn to remain near other fragile beings. We are asking how a circle around a fire could hold hunger, dependence, suspicion, care, shame, laughter, children, old wounds, and tomorrow's uncertainty all at once. And at the end of this first step, the mystery should feel larger, not smaller. If early groups were filled with so many reasons to crack from within, why did the crack so often stop before everything broke? Outside the group, a person did not step into pure freedom. They stepped into exposure. This is easy to forget when we imagine leaving as a choice of independence, as if an early human could simply walk away from tension, sleep somewhere else, and begin again alone. But in the world before farms, houses, roads, stored grain, metal tools, medicine, or written protection, distance from the group could quickly become distance from almost everything that made survival possible. The body alone was small. It could walk, carry, throw, dig, climb, listen, and remember, but it could not watch every direction at once. It could not sleep and guard itself at the same time. It could not easily hunt, gather, carry fire, care for a wound, protect a child, and remain alert through the night without help. So when someone felt anger inside the group, the choice to leave was not a simple escape from social pain. It could also mean entering a larger silence, where no familiar voice answered, no shared fire waited, and no other eyes noticed danger before it came close. This does not mean every person who left died, and it would be false to claim that early humans never moved between groups. Movement, visiting, temporary separation, and joining other people likely mattered very much. But leaving the protection of known companions still carried a cost. A lone person had to solve many problems at once. Where was water? Which plants were safe? Was the weather changing? Were there predators nearby? Could a small injury become a serious one? Could food be found before strength declined? Could a sleeping body remain safe through darkness? In a group, these burdens were spread across many bodies and many memories. One person remembered a dry season water place. Another noticed tracks. Another knew where tubers grew. Another heard movement in the grass. Another carried a child when the mother was tired. Another watched while others rested. This is one of the deeper roots of why the early group mattered. It was not only a cluster of people. It was a shared nervous system spread across the landscape. Each person added a little more sight, a little more hearing, a little more memory, a little more strength. The origin of human togetherness was shaped by this practical truth. Safety did not come only from being brave, it came from not having to be alone with every danger. The night makes this especially clear. Sleep is one of the oldest weaknesses in every animal body. A sleeping human cannot watch the dark edge of a camp. A sleeping human cannot defend a fire, answer a cry quickly, or notice a change in weather. In a group, sleep could be lighter for some and deeper for others. Rest could be shared, not perfectly, not by written schedule, but through proximity. A cough, a movement, a whisper, a child turning, a branch breaking nearby. These sounds meant more when others were close enough to hear them too. The group gave the individual something that strength alone could not give: overlapping awareness. This is why the outside of the group was not just empty space. It was a place where awareness narrowed back down to one body. For early humans, that narrowing may have been frightening. The same person who felt wronged by others might still know, in the body, that the group gave warmth, warning, food knowledge, and a chance to recover after weakness. This made the social problem more complicated. People could not simply abandon the group every time they felt insulted, tired, jealous, or unseen. The cost of leaving helped hold them near, but not in a beautiful or romantic way. It held them near through the pressure of reality. The cold did not care who had been offended. Hunger did not care who had spoken unfairly. A wound did not care who deserved more respect. Outside the group, the world answered the body directly. And perhaps that is why, in the earliest human circles, anger often had to wait. Pride had to wait. The wish to walk away had to meet the older knowledge that one person alone was easier for the world to break. Dependence inside an early human group was not an idea. It was something the body felt every day, while lifting a child, carrying firewood, watching another person dig for roots, or waiting for someone to return with news of water, tracks, fruit, or danger. Survival was not divided into clean separate jobs. It was braided. One person's morning effort could become another person's evening meal. One person's knowledge of a path could save the feet of everyone behind them. One person's patience with a crying child could allow another adult to sleep long enough to walk again the next day. This dependence did not need to be spoken as a rule. It was repeated so often that it became ordinary life. To move through a prehistoric landscape, a group needed more than strong individuals. It needed overlapping abilities. Some people were better at noticing small signs on the ground. Some remembered where certain plants appeared after rain. Some could shape stone, repair a carrying strap of hide or fibre, prepare food, calm a frightened child, tend a wound, or recognize when weather was turning. These skills did not belong equally to every person at every moment. Age, injury, pregnancy, illness, experience, and chance changed what each body could do. The group kept people from falling too far when one body became temporarily weak. A person did not have to be useful in the same way every day to remain part of the circle. Today, someone might need help crossing rough ground. Tomorrow, that same person might remember where water had been found in a dry season. Today, a child might slow everyone. Years later, that child might carry tools, gather food, watch younger children, or remember the stories of the elders. The origin of human group life was tied to this long exchange across time. The group was not only a solution for today's hunger, it was a way of carrying people through changes in strength. Hunting and gathering also made dependence unavoidable because success was uncertain. No one could promise that a hunt would end with meat, that fruit would be ripe, or that roots would be found in enough quantity. A small group spread risk by spreading attention and effort. Remember, when one person failed, another might succeed. When one food source disappeared, someone else's memory mattered. Food sharing was not only kindness placed on top of survival, it was a way of smoothing the unevenness of the world. But smoothing hunger also created obligation. If others had fed a person through a bad day, that person could not pretend to live outside the memory of the group. Help became part of the invisible thread that pulled people back toward one another. Care for children made the thread even stronger. Human children need a long time before they can feed, protect, and move themselves well. This long childhood meant that one adult alone could be stretched beyond what the body could easily bear. Other hands mattered. A grandmother's knowledge, an older sibling's watchfulness, a father's food, an aunt's attention, a neighbour's patience, or simply another adult's presence near the fire could change the burden of a day. We should not imagine every early group as perfectly caring or fair, but we can say that human survival has long depended on care that reached beyond the isolated parent. In such a world, a group was held together partly by the needs of its weakest members. A baby, an injured adult, a tired mother, a limping elder, or a sick child reminded everyone that independence was often an illusion. Even sleep depended on others. A person who slept alone gave the night everything: hearing, sight, defense, and fire. A person who slept near others entered a field of shared awareness. Someone might wake first. Someone might stir when the fire lowered. Someone might hear movement at the edge of camp. These were not grand heroic acts. They were small protections formed by nearness. The group survived because ordinary dependencies repeated themselves until leaving became more than a social choice. It became a loss of food, memory, care, warning, and rest. A group did not remove danger from early human life. It only changed the way danger was carried. Hunger still came. Cold still came. Illness still entered the body without asking. Animals still moved in the dark. Storms still crossed the land. But inside a group, danger was not always placed on one pair of shoulders. It could be divided, noticed earlier, remembered longer, and answered by more than one hand. This is why the outside of the group was not always a place a person could survive for long. It may have offered distance from anger, but it also took away the many small protections that anger had hidden. A person who left behind a conflict also left behind the child who called out in the night, the elder who remembered a dry season path, the companion who knew how to find edible roots, the one who could shape stone, the one who carried fire, the one who woke easily at strange sounds, and the one who might share food after a failed day. The group was difficult, but it was also full of borrowed strength. To live near others was to live inside a web of abilities that no single person fully owned. This did not make the group kind every day. It did not erase selfishness, fear, laziness, jealousy, or cruelty, but it meant that even an imperfect group could be more survivable than loneliness. In the deep past, this may have been one of the coldest truths of human life. The group did not have to be good to be necessary. It only had to be necessary enough that people kept returning to it. When food was scarce, a person might feel resentment toward those who received more. But outside the group, scarcity became harder to manage. When someone felt judged, they might dream of walking away. But outside the group, judgment disappeared along with help. When a young person felt restrained by elders, the open land might seem wider. But the same land held thirst, injury, confusion, and nights that asked too much from one sleeping body. So the group's power came not from perfect affection, but from comparison. However hard it was to remain near others, leaving could be harder. This comparison may have shaped the early emotional life of belonging. Belonging was not only warmth, it was also calculation, memory, fear, and habit. It was the body knowing that familiar problems were sometimes safer than unknown ones. The person beside the fire might be irritating, unfair, proud, or slow to forgive. Yet that person might also know where the river bends, how to calm a child when the clouds mean trouble, or where a broken tool can be repaired. A group could hold contradictions because life itself demanded contradictions. People could dislike one another and still depend on one another. They could argue and still share danger. They could carry old hurt and still walk in the same direction at dawn. This is what made early human groups so fragile and so persistent. The same closeness that caused tension also created survival value. If people were too far apart, they lost help. If they were too close without restraint, they risked conflict. The group had to stay somewhere between these two dangers. It had to keep enough nearness for food, care, memory, defense, and children, but enough space for anger to cool and pride to soften. That balance was not easy, and it was probably never perfect. Some groups surely split, some relationships surely failed, some people were surely pushed away, left behind, or chose to seek another camp. But the fact that human social life continued at all suggests that early people found repeated ways to remain near one another despite discomfort. The outside world pressed them inward. The inside world pressured them to manage themselves. Between those two forces, the early group became less like a peaceful family and more like a fragile shelter made of living people. It leaked, it strained, it could be uncomfortable, but when the cold, hunger, darkness, sickness, and uncertainty gathered around it, even a damaged shelter could feel worth keeping. Food was never only food in an early human group. It was warmth returning to the body after cold. It was strength after walking. It was patience restored after fear. It was the difference between a child sleeping quietly and a child crying from hunger. But food was also one of the most dangerous sources of tension because it did not arrive fairly, evenly, or on command. A group could spend the morning searching and find almost nothing. A person could follow tracks for hours and return empty-handed. A leader both. Another person could discover fruit, shellfish, honey, eggs, roots, nuts, or small animals by skill, luck, memory, or simply because they walked in the right direction. The land did not divide its gifts according to need. It did not know who had worked hardest, who had a nursing child, who was old, who was injured, or who had eaten less the day before. So whenever food entered the group, it carried a question with it. Who should receive it? Who should wait? Who had earned it? Who needed it most? Who had shared before? Who had held back? This is why food could hold a group together and threaten to pull it apart at the same time. If one person always kept too much, others might remember. If one family received more than others, suspicion could grow. If a skilled hunter or gatherer believed their success gave them the right to decide everything, the group might feel the beginning of imbalance. But if food was shared enough, even imperfectly, it could turn uncertainty into relationship. A person who was lucky today could become dependent tomorrow. A strong adult could become sick. A successful hunter could fail for many days. A careful gatherer could return to a place and find it empty. In that uneven world, sharing was not just a moral act. It was a way of spreading risk across time. The origin of human cooperation may have been shaped by this simple pressure. No one could guarantee their own success every day, and no body stayed strong forever. Food sharing allowed the group to survive the unevenness of nature by making individual luck less final. This does not mean early people shared everything peacefully, or that every meal was guided by fairness. That would be too clean and too modern a picture. Sharing could carry expectation. It could carry resentment. It could create quiet debts that were remembered even when no one counted them aloud. A person might give because they cared. They might give because others were watching. They might give because refusing would damage their place in the group. They might give because, deep down, they knew that hunger moves around. Today, it sits in another body. Tomorrow, it may sit in yours, around a fire, a piece of meat, a handful of gathered plants, or a small portion of fat could become more than nourishment. It could become a sign that a person was still included. To be given food was to be told, in a physical way, that the group had not pushed you outside the circle. To be refused repeatedly could feel like something colder than hunger. It could feel like social danger. This is why food belonged directly to the question of why early human groups did not fall apart. Food created a repeated test. Every day, or nearly every day, the group had to face whether its members would act only from immediate appetite, or whether they would leave enough space for tomorrow's dependence. The answer was probably never perfect. Some people took more, some gave more, some complained, some watched silently, some felt ashamed to need help, some felt proud to provide it. But through all these imperfect exchanges, the group learned who could be trusted, who was generous, who was dangerous, who exaggerated need, and who remembered others when they had enough. Food became a language before it was ever explained as a rule. It said, "Stay near." It said, "You may need me later." It said, "I remember what you did." It said, "The group is not fair all the time, but it is still safer than facing hunger alone." In this way, a meal was never only a meal. It was a small negotiation with the future. Each shared portion asked the same quiet question: can this fragile circle survive another day without turning hunger into separation? Sharing food in an early human group should not be imagined as a perfect act of kindness. It may have included kindness, but kindness alone is too simple to carry the whole truth. A person might share because they loved a child, respected an elder, remembered help from another adult, or felt pity for someone who returned empty-handed. But a person might also share because the eyes of the group were on them. They might share because refusing would be remembered. They might share because keeping too much could make others angry, suspicious, or less willing to help later. In a small group, generosity was never completely private. It happened in the open air, near familiar faces, near people who knew the history of previous meals. This made food a quiet social force. A piece of meat, a handful of gathered plants, or a portion of shellfish could say more than words. It could say, "I still belong with you." It could say, "I know you may feed me another day." It could say, "I am not trying to stand above everyone else." The origin of this kind of sharing was not found in comfort. It was shaped by uncertainty. Early humans lived with food sources that changed by season, weather, luck, skill, and movement. One person could not control the land. A skilled hunter could fail. A careful gatherer could arrive too late. A strong body could become weak from fever, injury, pregnancy, age, or exhaustion. So the group needed a way to keep one empty day from becoming a final disaster. Sharing spread the risk. It made hunger less personal. It allowed one person's good fortune to cover another person's bad day. But because it was so important, sharing also became emotionally dangerous. The person who gave might expect gratitude. The person who received might feel shame. The person who watched might feel that the division was unfair. The one who brought food might wonder why others expected so much. The one who failed to bring food might fear being seen as useless. Around the early fire, food could warm the body and expose the mind at the same time. This is why the group did not hold together through simple sweetness. It held together through repeated negotiations that were never fully spoken. How much should a successful person keep? How much should go to children? How much to elders? How much to the injured? How much to the person who had helped yesterday? These questions did not require written laws to be felt. They were present in the hands that divided food and in the faces that received it. A group that shared nothing could become brittle. A group that demanded everything from its most successful members could also become tense. The difficult task was not to remove hunger from social life. That was impossible. The task was to keep hunger from turning every person against every other person. In this way, food sharing became one of the oldest forms of balance. It reminded the strong that strength was temporary. It reminded the weak that weakness did not always mean exclusion. It reminded the lucky that luck was not ownership of the future. Yet this balance was fragile. If one person gave too little, trust could thin. If others demanded too much, resentment could grow. If praise gathered around one provider, pride could rise. If someone was repeatedly ignored, quiet anger could deepen. Nothing about this was clean or perfect. Still, the repetition mattered. Day after day, meal after meal, the group practiced remaining together under pressure. Each portion divided was also a small decision about the shape of the group. Would the group become a place where everyone took only what they could seize? Would it become a place where need was noticed? Would it become a place where generosity was respected but not exploited? These questions did not have to be answered in words. They were answered slowly, by behavior, memory, and consequence. In the deep past, before written promises, a shared meal could become a kind of promise made with the body. Not a promise that no one would ever go hungry. Not a promise that everyone would be fair. But a quieter promise that no person's luck, failure, strength, or weakness would stand completely alone. And perhaps that was one reason the group did not fall apart the first time hunger entered it. Hunger entered many times. The group survived only when enough people learned how to let food move through the circle, without letting resentment break the circle open. A shared meal did not solve the problems of an early human group. It did not erase envy, remove hunger, or make every person feel fairly treated. But it gave the group a repeated chance to remain a group. Each time food moved from one hand to another, something more than flesh, fruit, roots, shellfish, eggs, honey, or gathered plants was being passed along. A small part of tomorrow was being negotiated. The person who received food today might be the one who carried a child tomorrow. The person who gave food today might be the one who returned weak and empty-handed later. The elder who no longer gathered as quickly might hold knowledge of a dry season place. The young person who ate more than they provided might later become the strongest walker, watcher, toolmaker, or hunter. In this way, food sharing stretched the group across time. It allowed people to matter not only by what they had done that morning, but by what they had done before, what they might do later, and who they were inside the memory of the group. This is important because an early human group could not afford to measure every person only by immediate production. If it did, children would be useless, the sick would be disposable, the injured would be burdens, elders would be abandoned as soon as their bodies slowed, and anyone unlucky for too many days would become socially dangerous. But human groups that lasted had to carry people through unevenness. They had to survive the fact that no one is equally useful every day. Food made this visible. When a portion was given to someone who had not found food, the group was quietly saying that today's failure was not the whole measure of that person. When food was given to a child, the group was feeding a future that could not yet feed itself. When an elder received a share, the group was recognizing memory, guidance, kinship, or simply long belonging. None of this needed to be pure compassion. It could be practical, emotional, pressured, and imperfect all at once. But it helped keep the circle from turning into a set of isolated bodies, competing until the weakest fell away. The origin of this bond is directly tied to the question of why early groups did not fall apart. A group that shares food creates reasons to stay. A person who has been fed has a memory of being held inside the circle. A person who has fed others has a claim, even if no one speaks it aloud. A child who grows up seeing food move through many hands learns that survival is not only taking from the land, but also remaining in relation with people. Around the fire, these lessons would not need to sound like lessons. They would be seen in gestures. Someone breaks a piece, someone waits, someone gives to a smaller hand first, someone complains under their breath, someone watches to see whether an unfair person is taking too much again. Someone remembers. That remembering mattered. It meant food did not vanish when it was eaten. Socially, it stayed behind. It became reputation. It became trust or distrust. It became the reason someone might be helped later, or the reason others might hesitate. This made a meal one of the oldest places where the group examined itself. Was the group still balanced enough to continue? Were the hungry noticed? Were the generous respected? Were the selfish limited? Were the weak still included? These questions may sound soft, but in the early world, they were hard survival questions. If too many people felt excluded, the group could fracture. If too many people felt exploited, the group could turn bitter. But if enough food moved in enough directions, often enough, the group could keep its shape. Not because everyone was satisfied, but because enough people could still believe that staying near the others was worth the strain. A shared meal was therefore a quiet rope thrown across uncertainty. It tied today's good luck to tomorrow's bad luck. It tied strength to weakness, age to youth, skill to need, and memory to obligation. It did not make early human life peaceful, but it gave people a reason to return to the same fire after disappointment. And perhaps that is one of the most important things food did for early groups. It turned survival from a private struggle into a repeated exchange. It taught the body that hunger could move, help could move, and belonging could be renewed in portions small enough to hold in the hand. Children made the early human group necessary in a way that hunger alone cannot fully explain. Food could bring people together for a day, but children tied people together across years. A human child was not born ready to walk with the group, find food, recognize danger, carry tools, or understand the meaning of a warning voice. Compared with many animals, human children remain dependent for a long time. They need feeding, carrying, watching, warming, teaching, calming, and protection through many seasons before they can truly help themselves. This long childhood changed the shape of human life. It meant that survival was never only about the strength of adults in the present moment. It was also about whether the group could carry helplessness long enough for helplessness to become memory, skill, and future strength. A baby crying in the night was not simply one parent's problem. The sound moved through the camp. It could wake others, draw attention, increase tension, or call forth help. A toddler wandering too close to fire, water, thorns, animals, or rough ground needed more than one pair of eyes. A child who had to be carried slowed movement, changed how food was gathered, and made every decision about distance more serious. In this way, children forced the group to become more than a collection of hungry adults. They forced it to become a place of repeated care. This care was not always soft or perfect. It could be tiring. It could be uneven. It could create resentment. A nursing mother might need more food and rest than others could easily provide. An older child might feel ignored when a younger one needed attention. A tired adult might lose patience. A group preparing to move might be delayed by a small body that could not keep up. These were real pressures, not sentimental details. Yet the very difficulty of children may have helped keep early human groups from falling apart, because a child made separation more costly. One adult alone with a dependent child faced a heavy burden. Finding food, carrying supplies, protecting the child, watching the landscape, keeping warm, and sleeping safely became harder when all responsibility narrowed down to one body. In a group, those burdens could spread. Someone else could hold the child for a while. Someone else could watch when the mother rested. Someone else could bring food when one parent could not leave. Someone else could warn, teach, comfort, or simply be present. The origin of human togetherness is deeply connected to this spreading of care. Human life did not continue only because adults survived. It continued because children survived long enough to become adults. And children survived more easily when care was not trapped inside one exhausted pair of hands. This does not mean every early group cared for every child equally, or that childhood was safe in the way modern people might wish. That would be a false and overly gentle picture. The prehistoric world was hard. Many children likely died young. Food failed. Illness came. Injuries happened. Weather changed. But the fact that human beings developed such long, learning-heavy childhoods tells us something important. Our species was shaped in social conditions where young minds could be carried, protected, and taught for a long time. A child needed to learn not only what to eat, but what to avoid, who to trust, how to read faces, how to listen for danger, how to follow movement, how to remember places, and how to live among people without breaking the circle. The group was the first classroom, but it was also the first shelter around the unfinished human mind. So when we ask what kept early human groups from falling apart, we should not look only at fear, food, or adult agreement. We should look at the small body that could not survive alone, the child sleeping near the fire, needing the group before understanding what a group was. Around that child, adults had to coordinate, tolerate delay, manage tiredness, share attention, and return again and again to the same fragile arrangement. The child did not make the group peaceful, but the child made the cost of collapse painfully clear. A child in an early human group was rarely carried by one life alone. Even when the mother was the center of the child's first world, she was not the only world the child needed. A baby needed milk, warmth, touch, and protection, but also needed the mother to survive long enough to keep giving those things. And the mother, like every other person in the group, lived inside hunger, weather, movement, tiredness, and uncertainty. She could not always gather food while holding a child. She could not always sleep while watching danger. She could not always recover from birth, carry firewood, prepare food, move across rough land, and answer every cry without help. This is where the group became more than a place of shared food. It became a place of shared carrying. Not always gently, not always fairly, but often enough for human childhood to continue. A grandmother might hold a child near the fire while younger adults search for food. An older sibling might keep a toddler from wandering too close to water or flame. An aunt, uncle, cousin, or unrelated campmate might calm a child for a short while, offer a small portion of food, or notice danger before the parent did. These moments may seem small, but small care repeated every day can become a structure strong enough to hold a life. Human beings are often discussed as cooperative caregivers because children in many human societies receive care from people beyond the mother. We must be careful not to turn this into a perfect picture of ancient kindness. Help could be uneven. Some children may have received more attention because of kinship, affection, health, personality, or the position of their parents. Some adults may have avoided responsibility. Some mothers may have carried unbearable burdens. But the broader pattern still matters. Human children are so dependent for so long that the group itself becomes part of childhood. The origin of group stability is tied to this fact. A group with children could not be only a temporary gathering of adults who stayed together when life was convenient. It had to return again and again to the work of protection, feeding, teaching, and patience. A child was not useful in the immediate way a strong adult might be useful. A child could not bring back large amounts of food, defend the camp, remember distant water, or make careful tools. Yet the group had to invest in that child before the child could repay anything. This made human togetherness different from a simple exchange between equal adults. It forced the group to carry people who were not yet able to carry the group, and in doing so, it created deep bonds of expectation. A child who was watched by many people grew up inside many memories. They learned the voices of more than one protector. They learned who gave, who frightened, who comforted, who corrected, who laughed, and who turned away. The group entered the child's mind before the child could explain what a group was. At the same time, Adults became tied to one another through the child. A grandmother helping a daughter, an older sibling helping a younger one, a hunter bringing food to a nursing mother, or a campmate keeping watch while a child slept. Each act made separation more complicated. To break the group was not only to leave adults behind, it was to loosen the web around children who could not yet stand alone. That web may have been one of the quiet forces that kept early groups from falling apart, not because children made life easier, but because they made the cost of collapse impossible to ignore. In a world where so much was uncertain, a child was a living reason to remain near. The child asked for warmth before knowing the word warmth. The child asked for food before understanding hunger. The child asked for protection before knowing danger. And the adults, tired as they were, had to answer often enough that the small body survived into memory, skill, and belonging. A group with children was not only a group trying to survive the next day, it was a group carrying a future that could easily be lost. This may be one of the quietest reasons early human groups could not afford to fall apart too quickly. Adults could argue, feel tired, resent one another, compete for attention, or disagree over food. But the presence of children made every break heavier. A split between adults was not only a split between opinions or tempers, it could change who carried the young, who fed them, who watched them near water, who kept them warm at night, and who taught them what the landscape meant. A child did not know which plant was safe, which sound in the dark mattered, which animal track should be avoided, or which face in the group could be trusted. These things had to be learned slowly, through repetition, correction, imitation, and memory. If the group collapsed, learning collapsed with it. The child lost not only protection, but also the many small lessons that turned a helpless body into a human being capable of living with others. This is why children made the group more than a shelter of bodies. They made it a shelter of knowledge. An adult could show a child how to crack a nut, dig for roots, notice a bird's call, stay quiet near danger, hold a tool without injury, or wait for others before eating. Another adult could teach the child through tone, patience, warning, laughter, or disapproval. An elder might not walk as fast as others, but could still carry stories of places, seasons, animals, deaths, births, mistakes, and returns. Those stories were not entertainment alone. They were a way of passing caution into young minds before those minds had to learn everything through pain. In this sense, every child made the group remember why it had to endure. The group was not only feeding the present, it was preparing someone to inherit the difficult art of staying alive together. This did not make the group gentle all the time. Children can increase strain. They cry when adults need silence. They become sick when the group needs movement. They ask for food when food is scarce. They slow travel, disturb sleep, and expose the limits of everyone's patience. A group with children may have had more reasons to become tense, not fewer. But that is exactly what makes the question deeper. Early groups did not remain together because children made life easy. They remained together because children made separation costly. A nursing mother alone, a tired father alone, an elder alone with children, or a small set of relatives cut off from wider help would face a heavier and more dangerous life. The group allowed care to be shared across more hands, more eyes, and more memories. Even when care was imperfect, even when some people gave more than others, the network itself mattered. A child could be held while a mother rested. A child could be watched while food was prepared. A child could learn from someone who was not a parent. A child could be corrected before danger became final. Over time, these small acts made the group part of the child's body and mind. The child learned that survival did not come from one strong person alone. It came from returning to the circle, listening to voices, noticing who needed help, and understanding that one day the one being carried might become the one who carries. So the early group was held together partly by what was unfinished inside it. Children were unfinished bodies, unfinished memories, unfinished skills, unfinished futures. They reminded adults that human life reaches beyond the present hunger. A group could survive one argument, one unfair meal, one angry silence, because something smaller and more vulnerable still needed the circle to hold. And perhaps that is why, around early fires, the future did not look like an idea. It looked like a sleeping child, breathing softly among people who were tired, imperfect, and still not free to fall apart. Memory may have been one of the quietest forces holding early human groups together. Before written laws, before carved records, before formal courts, before names were fixed on documents, people still remembered. They remembered who shared food when hunger was sharp. They remembered who turned away when someone was injured. They remembered who stayed calm during fear, who exaggerated danger, who comforted children, who kept taking more than others, and who could be trusted near the fire when everyone was tired. In a small group, memory did not sit inside one person alone. It moved between faces. It lived in glances, warnings, repeated stories, and the way people changed their behavior around someone. A person's past did not disappear easily because the group was small enough for actions to echo. In modern life, a person can leave one place, change surroundings, meet strangers, and hide parts of yesterday. In an early human group, there were fewer strangers and fewer walls. If someone behaved selfishly, the same people saw it again the next day. If someone was generous, the same people carried that knowledge forward. This made memory a kind of invisible structure around the group. It did not need to be written down to matter. It shaped who was approached, who was avoided, who was believed, who was corrected, and who was watched more carefully. The origin of group stability was tied to this remembered pattern. A group could not survive only by solving each day as if no earlier day had happened. It had to carry information about people, because people themselves were part of the environment. A dangerous river, a dry valley, a useful stone, a safe plant, and an unreliable person were all things worth remembering. Trust was not an abstract word, it was practical knowledge. Could this person be counted on to return with food? Would they share? Would they panic? Would they protect a child? Would they lie about what they found? Would they become violent when hungry? These questions mattered because survival depended on choosing whom to stay near. Memory allowed the group to make those choices without beginning from nothing every morning. But memory could also make life harder. A bad action could follow a person. A mistake could become a reputation. A moment of fear could be retold until it became part of how others saw someone. This means memory was not always fair. It could protect the group, but it could also trap a person inside the shadow of an old failure. Still, without memory, the group would have been dangerously blind. It would not know who had helped in the past, who had taken too much, who needed watching, or who deserved patience because they had given patience before. Memory turned scattered events into social knowledge. It made the group more than bodies gathered by chance. It made the group a place where actions accumulated. This accumulation may have helped prevent collapse because it gave people reasons to control themselves. If a person knew others would remember selfishness, that person had a reason not to push too far. If a person knew generosity would be noticed, that person had a reason to give even when giving was difficult. If a person knew cruelty would not vanish, cruelty became more costly. The group did not need a written punishment for every harmful act. Sometimes the punishment was colder and quieter. Fewer people wanting to sit near you, fewer people trusting your words, fewer people rushing to help when you needed them. This was not perfect justice. It could be harsh, mistaken, or uneven. But it gave early groups a way to hold behavior within limits before formal rules existed. Around the fire, memory watched everyone. It watched the strong, so strength did not become unlimited. It watched the needy, so need did not become invisible. It watched the generous, so their giving did not vanish into silence. And it watched the dangerous, so the group would not be surprised too many times by the same harm. In this way, memory became a soft law made of repeated human attention. It helped the group remain together not by removing conflict, but by making conflict part of a longer record. A selfish moment was not only a selfish moment. A kindness was not only a kindness. Each act entered the shared mind of the group and waited there, quietly shaping what others would do next. Reputation could become a kind of law before anyone wrote laws down. It did not need a stone tablet, a council building, a prison, or a formal judge. It lived in the way people remembered one another. In a small early human group, every person carried a history in the minds of others. That history could make life easier or harder. A person known to share food might be welcomed near the fire with less suspicion. A person known to comfort children might be trusted when a parent had to move away for a short time. A person known to lie, threaten, steal, or take more than others might still remain inside the group, but they would not be held in the same way. Eyes would follow them. Voices might grow quiet when they came near. Their words might be doubted. Their needs might be answered more slowly. This was not written punishment, but it could still shape behavior. The fear of being remembered badly may have kept people from pushing too far. That fear was not abstract. In a world where food, warmth, protection, and help during sickness depended on others, reputation could touch survival itself. To lose the trust of the group was not only to lose comfort, it was to lose part of the shelter made by other human beings. This is why reputation belongs directly to the question of what kept early human groups from falling apart. It helped make selfishness costly without requiring a formal system. If someone always grabbed first, others could remember. If someone refused to help when help was possible, others could remember. If someone became dangerous when angry, others could remember. The group did not need to solve every problem with violence or exile. Sometimes the memory of others was enough to make a person hesitate. A hand might pause before taking too much. A voice might soften before insulting someone. A person might decide to share, not because they were pure-hearted, but because they understood that the group was watching. This does not make early social life fake. It makes it human. Much of human morality has always lived between feeling and consequence. People do some things because they care, and other things because they know carelessness will return to them later. Reputation turned the future into a presence inside the present. When someone acted, they were not only acting for that moment, they were shaping how others would treat them after hunger came again, after sickness came again, after danger came again. Still, reputation was not always fair. A shy person might be misunderstood. A mistake might be repeated in memory longer than it deserved. A strong personality might influence how others told the story of a conflict. Someone with fewer allies might carry blame more heavily than someone protected by kin. So reputation should not be romanticized as perfect justice. It was a human tool, and human tools can be uneven, but even an imperfect reputation system could reduce the chance that every conflict had to become open violence. It gave the group a softer way to respond. People could warn, avoid, mock lightly, complain, refuse attention, withhold trust, or speak to others before deciding what to do. These responses could hurt, but they also allowed the group to bend before it broke. In a small camp, one person's behavior did not remain private because one person's behavior could affect everyone. A careless fire, a selfish meal, a reckless shout near danger, or a cruel act toward a child could weaken the whole circle. Reputation helped the group turn individual behavior into shared knowledge. It said, "This person is safe enough. This person needs watching. This person gives. This person takes. This person remembers others. This person forgets them." Through these quiet judgments, the group built a kind of invisible map of trust. That map helped people know where to place themselves, whom to ask for help, whom to avoid during tension, and whom to believe when stories differed. Before written law, before formal leadership, before permanent settlements, such a map may have been one of the strongest things keeping the group from dissolving into separate, suspicious bodies. People stayed together partly because they knew they were seen. They were held not only by hunger, danger, children, and shared food, but by the old human fear of becoming someone others no longer trusted. A group did not need walls, prisons, written records, or formal punishments to make behavior matter. Long before any of those things existed, a small human group could still ask a difficult question without speaking it clearly. What kind of person are you becoming among us? That question may have followed people more closely than any rule carved in stone. It was present when food was divided, when a child was corrected, when someone returned late, when an injured person needed help, or when anger rose too quickly near the fire. In a small group, the face of another person could become a reminder. The silence after a selfish act could become a warning. A story retold in a low voice could become a boundary. People did not need to write down that someone had taken too much if everyone had seen the hand reach first. They did not need a court to know that a cruel person made the camp feel unsafe. They did not need a formal title to recognize that someone's words calmed others, or that someone else's words often made trouble worse. This is why memory and reputation were more than social details. They were part of the structure that helped the group stay together before larger institutions existed. The origin of this structure was simple but powerful. People who depend on one another must also keep track of one another. If the group forgot too easily, harmful behavior could repeat without cost. If the group punished too harshly, small mistakes could become permanent divisions. Somewhere between forgetting and destruction, human groups needed a softer system. Shared memory could provide that system. It allowed people to respond in degrees. A person might be warned, they might be teased, they might be avoided for a while, they might be watched more closely, they might lose influence, they might be forgiven after enough time and enough better behavior. None of this was perfect. A group could misjudge. A rumor could damage someone unfairly. A powerful personality could shape the memory of others. Kinship could protect one person and expose another. But even with these flaws, shared memory gave the group a way to hold pressure without immediately breaking. It helped people understand that each action entered a larger pattern. One angry word was not the end of belonging. One selfish meal was not always exile, but repeated selfishness, repeated cruelty, repeated refusal, repeated danger. These could slowly change how the group treated a person. This slow change mattered because early human life required staying near people who were never entirely safe, never entirely predictable, and never entirely replaceable. The group needed some way to keep dangerous behavior from growing, but it also needed room for repair. A person who made a mistake had to remain capable of returning to trust. Otherwise, every conflict would create a permanent wound. This may be one of the oldest and most delicate human tasks. Remembering enough to protect the group, but not remembering so rigidly that no one can change. Around the early fire, memory could be both shield and burden. It shielded the group from those who pushed too far. It burdened individuals with the knowledge that they were never acting only for themselves. A person who shared food was feeding a body, but also feeding trust. A person who mocked too harshly was not only making a sound, but shaping fear. A person who helped an elder cross rough ground was not only moving slowly, but placing themselves inside a remembered pattern of care. Over time, these patterns formed a quiet moral landscape. There were people one moved toward, and people one moved away from. There were voices that brought calm, and voices that tightened the air. There were hands that others trusted near children, tools, food, and fire. This quiet sorting did not end conflict, but it made conflict more manageable. It gave the group ways to respond before the only choices were violence, abandonment, or collapse. And so, before law became something written, before punishment became official, before leaders could command with settled authority, the group already carried a kind of social memory. It lived in the eyes around the fire. It lived in the stories people told after someone slept. It lived in the body's small decision to sit closer to one person and farther from another. Perhaps this is why early human groups did not fall apart as easily as they might have. They were not held together by innocence. They were held together by memory, by the fear of being remembered badly, and by the hope that a better act today might still be remembered tomorrow. Conflict was not a failure of early human group life. It was part of it. Wherever people shared food, sleep, danger, children, tools, movement, and memory, tension had room to grow. A small group did not need a large disaster to feel strain. It only needed repeated hunger, a tired body, a sharp word, an unfair division, a careless hand, or a person who seemed to receive more patience than others. We should not imagine early groups as peaceful circles where everyone naturally understood their place. Human beings carry pride, fear, desire, shame, impatience, and the wish to be seen. Those feelings did not begin with cities, farming, money, or written rules. They belong to the older human body and mind. In a prehistoric camp, a dispute could begin over food, but food might not be the whole reason. It could begin over who had worked harder, who had been ignored, who had become too confident, who had failed to help, or who was believed after a disagreement. A person might feel that their skill was not respected. Another might feel that someone else was taking too much authority. A mother might feel unsupported. An elder might feel dismissed. A young adult might feel watched too closely. These are ordinary human pressures, but in a small early group they became more intense because people could not easily step away into privacy. The same faces remained near the same fire. The same voices were heard again the next morning. The same memory followed each person from one day into the next. This made conflict dangerous, but it also made conflict unavoidable. The question is not whether early humans argued, resented, competed, or wounded one another with words and actions. They almost certainly did, because they were human. The deeper question is how those conflicts did not always destroy the whole group. A conflict inside a small band could not be treated lightly. If it became too sharp, people might refuse to cooperate. If cooperation weakened, food sharing, childcare, travel, warning, and protection could all suffer. A single violent or deeply selfish person could make everyone less safe. But a group that broke apart after every anger would also be too fragile to last. So early social life had to carry conflict without letting every conflict become final. This may be one of the oldest forms of human intelligence, not only making tools, not only finding food, but living with the discomfort of other people long enough for the group to continue. Conflict could take many forms. It might be open anger, but it might also be silence. Someone might stop sitting near another person. Someone might share less warmly. Someone might speak through a relative instead of directly. Someone might complain in a low voice to others. Someone might withdraw from a task or move at the edge of the group instead of the center. These quiet signs mattered because in small groups, social distance could be felt even without physical distance. A person did not have to be expelled to feel the cold of disapproval. They only had to notice that laughter stopped when they came near, or that fewer hands reached toward them when help was needed. Yet this quiet pressure could also prevent worse damage. If every conflict became a fight, the group would bleed itself apart. If every offense was ignored, resentment would build underground. Between violence and silence, human groups needed many softer responses. A warning glance, a joke that lowered pride, a complaint spoken before anger became dangerous, a temporary walk away, a relative stepping between two people, a shared task that allowed them to stand near one another without speaking too much. None of these responses were perfect. Some may have failed, some may have deepened hurt, but they show the kind of problem early groups had to solve again and again. They had to make room for anger, without letting anger become the only truth. They had to let people feel wronged without immediately losing them. They had to let a mistake remain a mistake, not always become a permanent exile. So conflict did not simply threaten the group from outside its structure. Conflict was inside the structure itself. The group survived only when it had enough ways to cool, redirect, remember, forgive, avoid, or contain the heat that human closeness created. Conflict inside an early human group did not always need to end with someone leaving, being driven away, or being hurt. In many cases, the most important response may have been smaller, reducing the heat before it became impossible to carry. A person who was angry could move to the edge of the camp for a while. Two people who had quarreled might stop speaking directly, but still continue walking in the same group. A relative might stand near one side and speak gently to the other. Someone older, calmer, or simply more trusted might remind both people of food, children, weather, or the need to move soon. Sometimes silence could protect the group better than another sharp word. Sometimes distance of only a few steps could prevent a conflict from becoming a permanent break. This kind of conflict management would not look dramatic from the outside. No grand ceremony would be needed, no written judgment, no official punishment, just small adjustments in space, voice, attention, and timing. Yet these small adjustments may have mattered deeply, because a small group could not afford to treat every anger as final. If every insult caused separation, the group would lose too many people. If every selfish act was ignored, resentment would grow. So the group needed ways to pause conflict without pretending it did not exist. Avoidance could be one of those ways. To avoid someone for a while is not the same as destroying the relationship. It can give anger time to cool. It can allow others to notice the tension. It can protect children, food preparation, travel, and sleep from being swallowed by one dispute. A person might sit beside a sibling instead of near the one who offended them. They might walk behind the group rather than at the center. They might take on a task that required less talking. In a world with little privacy, even these small movements could create breathing space. Humor may have also helped, though not always kindly. A joke could soften pride before it hardened into dominance. Gentle teasing could remind a person not to take themselves too seriously. Laughter could release the tightness after a tense moment. But humor had a dangerous edge. It could heal, or it could shame too deeply. It could lower a boastful person or wound someone already weak. This is why the group's survival depended not only on having social tools, but on using them carefully enough. The origin of group stability was not perfect peace. It was the ability to keep conflict from reaching the point where no one could return. Other people in the group also mattered, because conflict rarely belongs only to the two people directly involved. A dispute over food might affect children waiting to eat. A quarrel between adults might disturb sleep. A dangerous person might make everyone more alert. A grieving or humiliated person might withdraw from tasks others depended on. Because one conflict could spread through the group, others had reason to step in before the damage widened. They might distract, advise, criticize, comfort, or simply place themselves between two people at the right moment. These interventions did not have to be formal leadership. They could come from kinship, age, respect, affection, or practical necessity. The group was held together by many hands, quietly adjusting many tensions. Sometimes repair may have happened without apology in the modern sense. Two people might not say they were sorry. They might simply share a task again. One might pass food. One might help carry something heavy. One might sit closer after several days of distance. In a small early group, repair could be physical before it was verbal. The body returned before the words did. This matters because early human groups had to survive repeated disappointment. They could not depend on every person understanding every feeling. They needed ordinary ways for damaged trust to become usable again. Not perfect, not untouched, just usable enough for the next walk, the next meal, the next night, the next child, needing care. So conflict did not always break the group, because the group had many small ways to slow it down. Silence, humor, avoidance, mediation, shared work, and time could all become tools for keeping the circle from splitting too quickly. The group endured because anger was not always allowed to become the last word. What kept conflict from destroying an early human group was not the absence of anger. It was the presence of limits. Anger could rise, but it could not always be allowed to decide the future of everyone. A person could feel wronged, but the group still had to eat. Someone could feel insulted, but children still had to be watched. Two adults could avoid each other, but the group still had to move when water, weather, animals, or food required movement. This is where the early group had to become flexible. It could not be as rigid as a stone, breaking every time pressure came. It had to be more like a branch that bends in wind, losing shape for a while, but not splitting completely. Conflict did not disappear. It was absorbed, redirected, delayed, cooled, remembered, and sometimes repaired only partly. That partial repair mattered. A group did not need every relationship to become warm again. It needed enough trust to keep functioning. Enough people had to share food. Enough people had to watch danger. Enough people had to help with children. Enough people had to believe that tomorrow was still possible beside the same faces. This may sound like a small thing, but it was one of the deepest social achievements of early humans, learning how to continue after discomfort. In a world without written contracts, formal police, courts, or permanent institutions, the group itself had to carry the weight of order. It carried that weight through memory, expectation, shame, affection, kinship, habit, and the practical knowledge that a broken group could be dangerous for everyone. If a quarrel became too violent, the group lost safety. If a selfish person was never corrected, trust weakened. If resentment was never given space, it could grow into a deeper refusal to cooperate. So the group needed a middle path. Not total freedom for every impulse, and not total control over every feeling. A person could be angry, but not endlessly destructive. A person could be proud, but not so proud that others became unsafe. A person could need help, but not always take without giving when they could. These limits may have been enforced softly at first, through silence, laughter, criticism, distance, or the withdrawal of trust. But if someone crossed too far, the response could become harder. Others might refuse to support them, push them away, or in extreme cases make it impossible for them to remain. We should not romanticize this. Early human groups were not gentle moral classrooms. They were survival communities under pressure. Their ways of handling conflict could be unfair, painful, or harsh. But the important point is that conflict had to be managed somehow. A group that could not manage anger would lose its shape. A group that punished too quickly would also lose its shape. The fragile skill was knowing when to cool, when to remember, when to forgive, when to avoid, and when to say that someone had gone too far. This is why conflict did not always break the group. It became part of the group's work. Every disagreement tested the circle. Could it stretch? Could it let people move apart for a while and then return? Could it hold an injured pride without turning it into permanent exile? Could it protect the weak without letting one person use weakness to control others? Could it lower the dangerous without destroying the useful? These questions were not answered once. They were answered slowly, through repeated living. After a quarrel, someone still had to gather wood. Someone still had to prepare food. Someone still had to wake in the night. Someone still had to walk beside the person they had disliked yesterday. And in those repeated acts, the group proved that anger did not have to be the end. The early group survived because it found ways to let human beings remain human with all their difficult feelings without allowing every difficult feeling to become a final break. It was not peace that kept the group together. It was the long, imperfect practice of not letting conflict have the last word. Words gave early human groups another kind of shelter. Not a shelter made of branches, hides, stone, or firelight, but a shelter made of shared attention. A voice could tell others where water had been found, where animals had passed, which plants were dangerous, who was missing, who was injured, or when it was time to move. A voice could call a child back from danger before a hand could reach them. A voice could warn without running. A voice could carry fear from one body into many bodies quickly enough for the group to respond together. This does not mean we can know exactly how the first human language sounded, or when every part of speech became like ours. The deep past does not leave spoken words behind, but it is reasonable to say that communication, gesture, voice, expression, and eventually more complex language became central to human group life, because a group that shares information can act with more than one mind. In a dangerous landscape, knowledge trapped inside one person was weaker than knowledge that could move. If one person found a place where fruit was ripening, the group could benefit only if that knowledge travelled. If one person saw tracks near water, the warning mattered more when others understood it. If one person knew that a certain person had behaved dangerously, that memory could protect more people when it was shared. So words, or the older forms of communication that led toward words, helped turn individual experience into group awareness. This directly belongs to the question of what kept early human groups from falling apart. A group cannot remain together if its members cannot coordinate. People needed to know when to wait, when to leave, when to be quiet, when to help, when to share, and when someone had crossed a boundary. Communication made these things possible before written rules existed. Around a fire, a person could explain why food had been hard to find, why someone was angry, why a child needed care, or why the group should avoid a certain place. Without some way to share reasons, every action could become suspicious. A person returning late might seem selfish unless they could tell what happened. Someone taking food for a sick relative might seem greedy unless others understood. Someone refusing to move might seem lazy unless pain, fear, or knowledge of danger could be expressed. Words did not remove mistrust, but they gave mistrust something to work with. They allowed people to interpret one another instead of only reacting. This was not always gentle. Communication could calm the group, but it could also disturb it. A warning could save lives, but a rumor could damage someone. A story could teach cooperation, but a complaint could spread resentment. A name spoken with respect could raise a person's place in the group, while a name spoken with suspicion could lower it. This is why words became both shelter and risk. They made the group more connected, but also made each person more exposed to the shared mind of others. Still, without communication, the group would be more brittle. Anger would have fewer paths to soften. Memory would stay locked inside separate bodies. Children would learn more slowly. Food sharing would be harder to explain. Danger would travel more slowly through the circle. In this way, speech and shared signals helped the group stay whole by giving pressure a place to move before it broke the group apart. A person could complain instead of strike. A person could warn instead of flee alone. A person could ask for help instead of silently failing. A person could tell what they had seen, and the group could adjust. The early fire may have warmed bodies, but voices around it may have warmed the fragile space between bodies. They helped people remain understandable to one another, even when hunger, fear, and pride made understanding difficult. Stories may have helped early human groups hold together, because a story can carry more than information. A warning can tell people that a certain place is dangerous, but a story can make the danger stay in the mind. A command can tell a child not to wander, but a story can make the child remember why wandering matters. A simple report can say that someone behaved selfishly, but a repeated story can turn that selfishness into a lesson about what the group will not easily forget. We cannot know the exact stories spoken by early humans around their fires. Spoken words disappear into air. They do not fossilize like bone or stone. But human beings everywhere use stories to organize memory, teach children, explain danger, praise useful behavior, and mark the edges of what a group accepts. It is careful and reasonable to imagine that, as human communication became richer, stories became one way, groups carried shared knowledge from one day into the next. A story could hold a place, a season, a mistake, a death, a rescue, a betrayal, or an act of generosity. It could take one person's experience and make it available to others who had not been there. This mattered deeply in a prehistoric world, because learning everything directly could be too costly. A child who must learn every danger only by touching it may not survive long enough to become wise. A young adult who must repeat every mistake alone may place the whole group at risk. Stories allowed pain to travel without always being repeated in the body. They could say, "Do not cross there when the water is high. Do not follow that animal too far alone. Do not laugh at the old person's warning. Do not take more than others can forgive. Stay close when the weather changes. Share when you have enough, because hunger returns." These lessons were not abstract ideas floating above life. They belonged to food, fire, children, wounds, and movement through the land. The origin of group stability may have depended partly on this ability to make memory collective. A group held together better when more people remembered the same dangers and the same values. Stories also helped shape what kind of person the group admired. They could keep alive the memory of someone who carried a child through cold, shared food during scarcity, warned others before danger came, or gave up pride for the sake of peace. They could also keep alive the memory of someone who lied, took too much, ignored a warning, or brought danger close through carelessness. In this way, stories were not only entertainment, they were a soft pressure placed on behavior. A child listening near the fire might learn that courage was not always loud, that generosity mattered, that foolish pride could endanger others, or that belonging required restraint. An adult listening to the same story might hear a warning about their own behavior without being accused directly. This is important because direct accusation can break relationships when people are already tense. A story can speak sideways. It can correct without naming. A story can speak sideways. It can remind without ordering. It can lower a person's pride without turning every correction into open conflict. Of course, stories could also harm. A story told unfairly could damage someone's reputation. A repeated version of an event could leave out another person's pain. The same human power that held the group together could also divide it if used carelessly. But even this shows how important words had become. The group was now held not only by shared food, shared children, and shared danger, but by shared meaning. Around the fire, people could rehearse what the group believed about selfishness, bravery, care, foolishness, memory, and repair. They could sleep with the same images inside their minds. They could wake with the same warnings still quietly present. A story did not force everyone to be good. It did not make the group fair, but it gave the group a way to remember together, and remembering together made the circle harder to break. But words did not only protect the group, they could also expose a person to the group's judgment. This is the colder side of language. A voice could warn others about danger, but it could also warn others about a person. A story could teach children where not to walk, but it could also teach everyone whom not to trust. A repeated comment, a quiet complaint, a joke with a sharp edge, or a name spoken in a certain tone could slowly change how one person was seen. In a small early human group, this mattered deeply because a person's place among others was not separate from survival. To be trusted was to be included more safely in food, care, warning, and rest. To be distrusted was to feel the circle loosen around the body. Words made that loosening possible before any formal punishment happened. Someone could become less welcome not because a leader declared it, but because talk moved through the group like a thin wind. People might begin to sit farther away. They might hesitate before sharing. They might stop asking for help from that person. They might listen less carefully when that person spoke. This did not require written law. It required only memory, voice, and repeated contact. The origin of group stability was therefore tied to a difficult power. People could use words to keep harmful behavior within limits, but they could also use words to wound, isolate, or distort. If someone was greedy, careless, violent, or unreliable, talk about that person could protect the group. It could help others watch more closely. It could warn children. It could make selfishness costly. But if words became unfair, exaggerated, or cruel, they could turn the group against someone too completely. A person could be trapped by a story others kept telling. A mistake could become a permanent identity. A private sorrow could become a public weakness. This means language held the group together in a way that was never perfectly gentle. It gave the group tools for coordination, teaching, repair, and warning, but it also gave the group tools for pressure. Around the fire, a person was not only warmed by voices, they were measured by them. This may be one reason early human groups needed care not only in what they did but in what they said. Words could lower pride without violence. They could remind someone that they had taken too much. They could bring shame before harm became larger. They could let anger travel as speech instead of as a blow. In this sense, language may have helped prevent groups from breaking apart by giving conflict a softer path. A complaint could be spoken. A warning could be shared. A memory could be placed into words. But speech could not be allowed to become endless poison. If every complaint became a story of permanent blame, the group would harden. If every joke became humiliation, people would withdraw. If every warning became suspicion, trust would thin. So the group had to live with another balance. Enough speech to remember danger, but not so much cruelty that memory destroyed belonging. This balance was fragile. It depended on timing, tone, relationship, and the group's ability to know when words had gone too far. A spoken warning could protect the circle. A spoken insult could crack it. A story could guide a child into wisdom. A rumor could push an adult toward isolation. The same human gift that allowed the group to share knowledge also allowed it to share fear. And yet, without that gift, the group would have been poorer, slower, and more blind. It would have struggled to coordinate movement, teach the young, explain motives, soften conflict, and remember who had helped or harmed. Words became a shelter because they let many minds live partly inside one another. They became dangerous because no one could fully control what entered that shared space. So language did not hold early groups together by making people pure or peaceful. It held them together by making behavior visible, memory portable, warnings shareable, and repair sometimes possible. The spoken world around the fire could comfort, correct, accuse, teach, and forgive. It could keep a group from falling apart, but only if the group learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to speak without turning every wound into a sentence that never ended. In a small early human group, one person could become important, but importance could not always become unlimited power. A skilled hunter, a strong fighter, an older person with deep memory, a careful healer, a persuasive speaker, or someone who often found food might receive respect. That respect could be useful for the group, because people sometimes need to listen quickly when danger is near, when weather is changing, or when a difficult decision has to be made. But respect can change shape if it grows too far. A person who is admired may begin to expect obedience. A person who brings food may begin to believe the food gives them the right to control others. A person who speaks well may begin to bend memory in their own favor. A person who is strong may begin to frighten weaker people into silence. This was dangerous for a small group, because one person's unchecked pride could make everyone less safe. If the group allowed one body or one voice to rise too high above the others, resentment could thicken. People might share less freely, speak less honestly, avoid tasks, hide food, whisper in fear, or eventually leave. So one of the things that may have kept early human groups from falling apart was not simply leadership, but the limiting of leadership. The group needed useful people, but it also needed to prevent useful people from becoming too dangerous. This is a delicate point, because we should not pretend that every early group was perfectly equal. Human beings have always differed in age, strength, skill, knowledge, confidence, kin support, and social influence. Some people were surely listened to more than others. Some may have pushed harder than others. Some may have frightened the group. But in small mobile groups, especially where food could not easily be stored in great quantities, power had limits that later settled societies did not always have. A person could not command a large army, lock food inside a granary, or control land through written ownership. Their influence depended heavily on whether others still chose to listen, share, travel, marry, cooperate, and remain near. The origin of group balance may have rested on this simple fact. Power that depends on cooperation can be weakened when cooperation is withdrawn. If someone became too boastful, others might laugh at them. If someone demanded too much, others might ignore them. If someone tried to dominate every decision, others might speak against them, avoid them, or move away toward relatives. If someone became violent, the group might unite against them because everyone understood the danger of letting one person make the camp unsafe. These responses were not gentle in a sentimental way. Mockery can wound, avoidance can isolate, collective pressure can be painful, but they may have served an important purpose. They reminded each person that belonging required restraint. No one could take endlessly and still expect the group to hold them. No one could frighten everyone forever without creating the conditions for resistance. In this sense, the early group was held together partly by a quiet refusal to let one person become the whole center. The fire belonged to many bodies. The children belonged to many concerns. The paths, warnings, hunger, sleep, and future of the group could not be safely placed inside one person's pride. This is why equality, where it existed, should not be imagined as a soft, natural peace. It may have required effort. People had to notice when someone took too much space. They had to reduce dangerous pride before it hardened into control. They had to protect generosity from becoming command. They had to respect skill without surrendering the group's balance. That balance was never perfect, and sometimes it surely failed. But when it worked, it gave the group a way to keep strong individuals useful without letting strength break the circle. The group survived not by removing difference, but by refusing to let difference become total domination. The balance inside an early human group should not be mistaken for peaceful equality. If some small mobile groups remained relatively equal, that equality probably required constant work. It was not a soft feeling that everyone naturally respected. It was more likely a living pressure, renewed whenever someone tried to rise too far above others. A person who boasted too loudly after bringing back food might be laughed at. A person who tried to order others too often might be ignored. A person who used strength to frighten others might find that the group became colder around them. A person who kept taking more than they gave might discover that people no longer moved toward them with trust. These responses may sound small, but in a world where belonging was tied to food, care, sleep, warning, and help during weakness, small social responses could be powerful. To be laughed at, avoided, doubted, or quietly resisted was not nothing. It reminded a person that the group was watching, and that no one could safely turn the shared circle into a private throne. This is important, because domination does not always begin with violence. It can begin with repeated confidence. It can begin when one person's opinion is always treated as final, when one person's hunger matters more, when one person's anger controls the mood of the camp, or when others become afraid to speak. If such patterns grew unchecked, the group could become unstable. People might not openly rebel at first. They might withdraw, speak in whispers, share less, avoid cooperation, or begin to imagine another camp, another set of relatives, another fire. So the group had to reduce dangerous inequality before it broke the deeper trust that made cooperation possible. This reduction did not have to be formal. It could happen through teasing, complaint, refusal, silence, or the simple act of not following someone who expected to be followed. The origin of this social balancing is closely tied to the title's question. Early groups did not stay together only by loving one another. They stayed together by preventing any one person from making life unbearable for too many others. Yet this should not be romanticized. Teasing can become cruelty. Criticism can become unfair blame. Avoidance can isolate someone who is already weak. Collective pressure can protect the group, but it can also crush a person. These tools were human tools, and human tools are never pure. Still, they may have helped solve a serious problem. How can a group use skill, strength, courage, memory, and confidence without letting those qualities become domination? A good tracker might need respect. A brave defender might deserve gratitude. A generous provider might be valued. An elder's memory might guide the group, but respect had to remain different from surrender. Gratitude had to remain different from obedience. Knowledge had to remain different from control. If the group could keep those differences clear, it had a better chance of staying whole. People could admire someone without becoming trapped beneath them. They could listen without giving away every decision. They could accept help without allowing the helper to own the group's future. This fragile balance may have been one of the oldest forms of social intelligence. It required people to sense when admiration was turning into fear, when confidence was turning into command, and when usefulness was becoming dangerous. The group needed strong people, but it needed the strength of many more than the rule of one. It needed voices that could correct a boastful person, hands that could refuse a greedy person, and enough shared memory to know when a pattern was becoming harmful. In that way, equality was not the absence of pressure. It was pressure moving sideways, from many people toward anyone who tried to stand too high for too long. The group did not remain together because everyone was the same. It remained together because difference was watched, Power was limited, and even the strongest person still had to live under the eyes of others. A group could survive difference, but it could not easily survive one person becoming too heavy for everyone else to carry. This was the final pressure inside the problem of power. Early human groups needed skilled people, brave people, careful people, persuasive people, and people with long memories. Without them, the group would lose knowledge, direction, warning, and confidence. But if any of those people began to treat their usefulness as ownership, the group could become unsafe from within. A person who found food often might begin to act as if hunger gave them authority over others. A strong person might expect fear to replace agreement. A clever speaker might turn stories toward their own advantage. An elder might confuse memory with control. A successful hunter might forget that a failed hunter today could be a necessary helper tomorrow. When this happened, the group faced a delicate task. It could not simply reject every person who stood out, because talent mattered. But it also could not allow talent to become a weapon against the circle. So the group had to keep usefulness connected to responsibility. The one who knew more still had to listen. The one who brought food still had to share enough. The one who was strong still had to sleep under the same social eyes as everyone else. The one whose words carried weight still had to fear being remembered badly if those words became harmful. This is where the group's invisible limits became important. Limits did not always need to be announced. They could appear when people stopped laughing at a boastful person's stories. They could appear when others refused to follow a demand. They could appear when a dangerous person found fewer allies. They could appear when relatives whispered warnings, when children were kept farther away, when food was shared more cautiously, or when the group quietly chose another voice to listen to. These were small acts, but together they formed a boundary around power. They reminded each person that no skill made them larger than the group itself. The origin of this boundary was not idealism. It was survival. If too many people felt dominated, they would stop trusting. If trust thinned, food sharing weakened, childcare weakened, warning weakened, sleep weakened. The group might still appear whole from the outside, but inside it would begin to loosen. People would hold back, hide thoughts, hide food, avoid tasks, or look for chances to move away. In that way, unchecked power could make a group fall apart slowly before anyone actually left. It could turn togetherness into obedience, and obedience is not the same as belonging. Belonging requires enough safety for people to remain present with their whole attention. It requires that a person can speak sometimes, refuse sometimes, be angry sometimes, and still not be crushed by someone stronger. This does not mean early groups were fair in every case. They were made of humans, and humans can fail. Some people surely suffered under stronger personalities. Some were blamed unfairly. Some were silenced by kinship, fear, age, sex, strength, or circumstance. But the broader social problem remains clear. A group that had no way to limit harmful dominance would be a group at risk. It might survive for a while, but resentment would gather under the surface. So the group endured when power remained answerable to others. Not perfectly answerable, not always gently answerable, but answerable enough that one person could not always bend the whole circle around their hunger, pride, fear, or ambition. This answerability helped the group stay flexible. A respected person could lead in one moment and be corrected in another. A strong person could protect the group without owning it. A generous person could be honored without becoming untouchable. A voice could guide without becoming the only voice. The circle held because the center was never allowed to become completely fixed. Many people had to remain part of the balance. Many eyes had to watch. Many memories had to carry the record. Many small refusals had to keep one large will from swallowing the rest. And perhaps this is why early human groups, fragile as they were, did not always collapse under the weight of difference. They learned, slowly and imperfectly, that a group can respect strength while still protecting itself from strength. It can need certain people deeply and still refuse to belong to them completely. Sometimes the thing that kept an early human group from falling apart was that it did not force itself to stay in one piece. This may sound strange, because we often imagine survival as a matter of holding everyone together at all costs. But a group that never allows distance can become too tight, and a group that becomes too tight can break. When anger lasts too long, when food is scarce, when one person becomes too difficult, when two families no longer trust each other, or when young adults begin to look toward other possibilities, staying close every moment may make the danger worse. A small group living under constant pressure needed closeness, but it also needed release. One way to release pressure was temporary separation, not always a dramatic exile, not always a final goodbye. Sometimes it may have been a few people moving to another camp for a while, a family following a different food source, relatives visiting another group, or part of the band traveling ahead while others remained behind. In such a life, splitting did not always mean collapse. It could be a way of preventing collapse. If too many hungry bodies gathered around too little food, separation could reduce pressure on one place. If two people could not stop provoking each other, distance could let anger cool. If a young adult needed a different social space, another group might offer a safer path than open conflict. If one camp grew tense with jealousy, shame, or resentment, movement could change the emotional weather. This is directly connected to the question of what kept early human groups from falling apart, because stability does not always mean staying still. In mobile foraging life, the group may have survived by being flexible, by changing shape before the strain became final. A circle could loosen, stretch, divide, and later reconnect. That kind of movement allowed social pressure to breathe. It also fit the landscape itself. Food was not fixed in one place all year. Water changed. Animals moved. Plants ripened and disappeared. Weather opened some paths and closed others. The land did not always reward a group for remaining together as one crowded unit. Sometimes smaller parties could gather different foods, watch different areas, or move more easily. Practical separation and social separation may have worked together. A group that needed to follow scattered resources might also find relief from crowded tensions. This does not mean every split was peaceful. Some separations were probably painful. Some may have come after fear, anger, rejection, or a serious failure of trust. Some people may have left because they felt unsafe. Some may have been pushed away. Some may never have returned. We should not soften this into a perfect rhythm of friendly visiting. But we should also not assume that every division meant the death of the group. Human social life is often more complex than that. A group can divide in one season and remember one another in another season. People can move apart and still share kinship, past meals, marriages, stories, obligations, and future chances to meet again. This possibility gave early groups a way to survive tension without turning every disagreement into permanent destruction. The group was not a stone wall that either stood whole or shattered. It was more like a woven net. Some strands could pull apart for a while without the whole net disappearing. A person might leave with relatives rather than alone. A family might join people they already knew. A young person might find a mate in another group, tying two circles together instead of simply leaving one behind. These movements could reduce conflict inside one camp while creating links between camps. In this sense, separation could become a form of connection. It gave people somewhere to go before anger became violence, before resentment poisoned every meal, before a difficult person became unbearable to everyone. The early group endured not only because people stayed, but because staying did not always have to mean remaining shoulder to shoulder every day. Sometimes the group survived by allowing distance to do what closeness could not do. Distance could cool a quarrel. Distance could reduce hunger. Distance could protect pride from humiliation. Distance could give people time to become useful to one another again. And when the season changed, when food returned, when a child grew, when grief softened, or when memory became less sharp, some of those separated lives could cross again. The group did not always avoid breaking by refusing all cracks. Sometimes it avoided breaking because the crack was allowed to widen just enough that the whole circle did not split forever. Seasonal movement may have given early human groups one of their most important ways to remain connected without remaining fixed. A group did not have to live as one unchanging circle all year. In many foraging ways of life, people moved with water, animals, plants, weather, and the changing usefulness of different places. When food was spread out, smaller parties could move separately. When a place became rich for a while, more people could gather. When a season made travel easier, relatives, partners, and familiar groups could meet again. This flexible pattern meant that social life did not have to choose only between complete unity and complete collapse. People could separate, travel, visit, join, leave, and return. The group could breathe with the land. This matters because early human groups were not only held together by what happened inside one camp, they may also have been held together by wider relationships beyond the immediate fire. A person's world could include relatives in another band, remembered faces from past meetings, possible marriage partners, trusted visitors, people who knew different paths, and people who carried news from elsewhere. These wider ties made separation less final. If tension grew too strong in one place, someone might not have to vanish into total loneliness. They might move toward kin, toward a spouse's relatives, toward a seasonal meeting place, or toward a group already connected through earlier exchanges. This kind of movement could reduce the danger of social pressure becoming social death. The origin of group endurance may therefore lie not only in staying close, but in having other known humans somewhere beyond the edge of the present camp. Wider networks also helped because no single group possessed everything. One group might know a safer crossing, another might know when certain animals moved, another might carry stone from a distant source, shells from a coast, ochre, plant knowledge, stories, or news of danger. We should be careful not to imagine every early exchange as organized trade in the modern sense, but contact between groups could still matter. It could bring partners, information, materials, and social options. It could prevent a small band from becoming a sealed container where every conflict had nowhere to go. If one young person married into another group, the connection did not only affect two individuals, it linked memories, obligations, and future visits. If groups met during a season of abundance, old tensions inside one camp might be softened by new voices, shared rituals, play, courtship, or the simple relief of seeing other people. The group that had felt too tight could become part of a larger human field for a while. This larger field may have helped keep smaller circles from breaking under their own weight. Of course, meetings between groups were not always peaceful. Strangers could bring danger, competition, disease, suspicion, or violence. It would be false to turn all contact into friendship, but it would also be too narrow to imagine early humans living only in isolated little units, sealed away from one another forever. Human life has long depended on connection across distance. When groups could split and later meet, they gained a way to manage both nature and emotion. Food pressure could be reduced. Marriage partners could be found. News could travel. Conflicts could cool. A person who felt trapped in one social arrangement might find another, without cutting all ties to the human world. In this way, the ability to move between groups may have worked like a hidden safety valve. It did not remove jealousy, anger, hunger, or fear. It did not guarantee kindness, but it gave pressure somewhere to go. A group with no outside ties might become trapped inside its own tensions. A group with wider connections could loosen without disappearing. It could send some people outward and welcome others inward. It could become smaller for a while, then larger again. It could carry memory across distance. Perhaps this is one of the quiet reasons early human groups did not simply fall apart under conflict. They were not always single closed circles. They were parts of a wider human fabric, stretched across seasons, paths, kinship, exchange, and remembered meetings. When one circle became strained, another circle might still be waiting somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the river bend, beyond the dry plain, holding open the possibility that separation did not have to mean the end of belonging. A group that could loosen without disappearing had a better chance of surviving pressure. This may be one of the quiet lessons of early human social life. Closeness was necessary, but closeness without movement could become dangerous. Too many people near too little food could turn hunger into blame. Too many old injuries inside the same camp could turn memory into bitterness. Too many strong personalities pressed into one small circle could make every meal, every decision, and every silence feel heavy. So the group needed more than unity. It needed the ability to change shape. Some people could move away for a time. Some could travel with relatives. Some could join another familiar group. Some could return when the season changed, when food became more plentiful, when anger cooled, or when a child, marriage, death, or journey rearranged the relationships between people. This was not the same as simple abandonment. It was a way of letting the human circle stretch before it snapped. In a mobile life, the boundary of a group may not have been as fixed as we imagine. People could belong strongly to one set of faces, yet still have ties beyond them. A person might be connected through birth, partnership, friendship, exchange, past help, shared stories, or remembered meetings at seasonal places. These connections meant that separation did not always have to become loneliness. It could become movement within a wider human world. This wider world mattered because no small group could carry every answer by itself. One camp might become tense, hungry, or socially crowded. Another camp might offer new food knowledge, new partners, calmer relationships, or simply enough distance for old anger to lose its sharpest edge. The origin of group endurance may have depended on this pattern. People stayed together partly because they did not have to stay in exactly the same arrangement forever. Flexibility gave belonging room to breathe. A person who felt humiliated did not always need to fight. A family under pressure did not always need to break every tie. A young adult seeking a place in the world did not always need to challenge the same elders again and again. Movement could create a pause, and pauses can be powerful in human life. A pause gives anger time to become memory rather than action. It gives pride time to settle. It allows people to meet again later as slightly different people, carrying different needs. Of course, not every separation healed. Some departures were final. Some conflicts left wounds that did not close. Some people may have been excluded, abandoned, or harmed. Some groups may have split in ways that left bitterness behind for generations of memory. It would be untrue to make early human flexibility into a perfect solution. But it is also important to see that survival does not always depend on holding a group tightly in one form. Sometimes survival depends on letting the form shift. The group could become smaller for a while, then larger again. It could send some members outward, and later receive visitors inward. It could protect children by joining with relatives when help was needed. It could reduce hunger by scattering across the land. It could reduce conflict by giving difficult relationships distance. It could keep old ties alive through meetings, marriages, stories, and obligations. In this way, splitting was not always the opposite of group stability. Sometimes it was one of the methods of stability. The group did not fall apart because it was allowed to bend across space and time. It did not have to solve every conflict inside one night, around one fire, with every wounded person still sitting close enough to feel the other's breath. It could let the landscape hold part of the tension. A river, a valley, a coast, a forest edge, a dry plain, or a seasonal gathering place could become part of the social system. Distance became a tool, just as food sharing, memory, language, and reputation were tools. It helped people remain connected without being trapped. And perhaps this is why early human groups endured more often than their tensions might suggest. They were fragile, but they were not always rigid. They could separate without forgetting, return without beginning from nothing, and carry belonging across the empty spaces between camps. By the time we return to the first question, it no longer feels simple. What kept early human groups from falling apart was not one thing. It was not only affection, not only fear, not only food, not only children, not only language, and not only the memory of who had helped or harmed. It was all of these forces pressing together, sometimes gently and sometimes painfully, around the same fragile circle. An early human group was not a peaceful shelter where every person naturally knew how to care for every other person. It was a difficult shelter made from living bodies, living needs, and living memories. It had to hold hunger without turning every meal into war. It had to hold anger without letting every quarrel become exile. It had to hold children who could not yet survive, elders who carried knowledge but sometimes slowed movement, skilled people who were useful but could become proud, weak people who needed help, strong people who needed limits, and silent people whose hurt could grow if no one noticed. The group was always under pressure from two directions. Outside it were cold nights, uncertain food, wounds, predators, weather, distance, and the loneliness of one body trying to watch every danger alone. Inside it were jealousy, shame, pride, resentment, desire, fatigue, and the old human fear of being treated as less valuable than others. The group survived only when the pressure from outside was strong enough to make closeness necessary, and the habits inside were flexible enough to make closeness bearable. This is the slow answer that begins to form after walking through the earlier parts. Early people did not need to be perfect to stay together. They needed enough repeated practices that made staying possible. Food sharing helped soften the unfairness of luck. If one person found food today and another failed, the group could keep failure from becoming immediate abandonment. Childcare stretched responsibility beyond one mother or one father and made the future visible in small bodies sleeping near the fire. Memory turned behavior into reputation, so kindness and selfishness did not vanish as soon as the day ended. Words allowed warnings, explanations, stories, complaints, and repair to move between people before conflict became only silence or violence. Limits on pride helped keep useful people from becoming dangerous people. Temporary separation gave the group room to breathe when too much closeness became harmful. None of these forces worked perfectly. A shared meal could create resentment, a story could become a rumor, reputation could become unfair. A strong person could still frighten others, a child could still be neglected, a conflict could still go too far. But the group did not need perfection. It needed enough repair to continue. It needed enough trust to make the next walk possible. It needed enough memory to warn without freezing everyone in old blame. It needed enough sharing to keep hunger from cutting each person away from the others. It needed enough distance to cool anger and enough closeness to keep belonging alive. The origin of human togetherness may be found in this balance between need and restraint. We were not simply creatures who loved the group. We were creatures who suffered inside the group and still often returned to it, because life outside the group could be even harder. That is a cold truth, but not an empty one. It suggests that human social life began not as a perfect dream, but as a repeated compromise with reality. People remained near the same fire because the fire was warmer with others, because the night was less frightening with others, because children needed many eyes, because food luck changed from day to day, because memory made behavior matter, and because even conflict could sometimes be softened before it destroyed everything. The group was not held together by one great agreement. It was held together by many small agreements renewed again and again. Share enough, listen enough, remember enough, do not take too much, do not shame too deeply, do not leave too quickly, return when anger cools, and let the circle bend before it breaks. The lesson inside this ancient question is not only about people who lived long before us, it is also about the shape of human life itself. No human being survives by strength alone for very long. Strength matters, skill matters, courage matters, intelligence matters, but none of them stand safely by themselves. A strong person still becomes tired, a skilled person still has unlucky days, a brave person still sleeps. An intelligent person still needs food, care, warning, and patience from others. Early human groups remind us that survival was never only a contest of individual power. It was also a slow practice of staying connected without destroying one another. This may be the educational value of looking back at the deep human past. It helps us see that cooperation is not a soft decoration placed on top of life after survival has already been solved. Cooperation was part of survival. Sharing food, watching children, remembering who could be trusted, speaking carefully, limiting harmful pride, and giving distance when closeness became too painful were not small emotional details. They were survival technologies made from behavior instead of stone. A hand axe could cut, fire could warm, a shelter could block wind, but a group also needed invisible tools: trust, restraint, patience, memory, and the ability to repair after tension. Without those, even the sharpest tool could not keep a group whole. This does not mean we should romanticize early humans as wiser, kinder, or morally purer than people today. That would not be honest. They were human, and humans can be afraid, selfish, proud, jealous, careless, and cruel. Some groups surely failed. Some people surely suffered unfairly. Some children were not protected enough. Some conflicts ended badly. Some separations were not healing, but final. The past was not a peaceful lesson painted in warm colors. It was hard, uncertain, and often painful. But that makes the endurance of human groups more meaningful, not less. The fact that imperfect people still found ways to remain near one another tells us something important. It tells us that social life does not require perfection before it can begin. It requires enough repeated acts that make tomorrow possible. Enough food shared that hunger does not become isolation. Enough honesty that suspicion does not swallow trust. Enough memory that harm is not ignored. Enough forgiveness that one mistake does not become a permanent identity. Enough humility that useful people do not become dangerous. Enough space that anger can cool before it becomes destruction. These are not only ancient principles, they are still recognizable in modern life, even though our world is filled with houses, roads, money, screens, institutions, and private rooms. We still live with the old problem of closeness. Families can strain under silence. Communities can weaken when trust disappears. Workplaces can become unhealthy when one person's pride grows without limits. Friendships can break when small unfairness repeats too long without repair. We are not hunter-gatherers around a prehistoric fire, and it would be wrong to pretend that modern life is the same as the deep past. But the deeper human pattern has not vanished. People still need to feel that they are not facing the dark alone. People still need others to remember the good they have done, not only the mistakes. People still need boundaries against those who take too much. People still need stories that teach care without turning fear into cruelty. People still need a way back after anger. So the value of this question is not simply historical curiosity. It asks us to notice the quiet agreements that keep any human circle from breaking. Be fair enough. Listen enough. Share enough. Correct harm without enjoying humiliation. Remember pain without making repair impossible. Give people room, but do not abandon them too quickly. The early group survived by repeating these fragile acts in forms we can only partly reconstruct. Our own group survived by repeating them too, in different places, with different tools, under different skies. And perhaps this is the humbling message. Human beings were never kept together by comfort alone. We were kept together by the difficult discipline of needing one another, and learning, slowly, not to let that need become a wound. So perhaps the deepest answer is also the quietest one. Early human groups did not stay together because human beings were naturally easy to live with. They stayed together because the group became the place where weakness could survive. Hunger could be shared before it became death. Fear could be heard before it became panic. A child could be carried before it was strong. An elder could be remembered before slow steps became only a burden. A proud person could be lowered before pride became rule. An angry person could be given time before anger became exile. Again and again the group had to choose some form of continuation. Not always kindly, not always fairly, not always successfully, but often enough for children to grow, knowledge to travel, wounds to heal, and memory to pass from one generation into another. That is what makes this question so human. The group was never a perfect circle. It had cracks. It had voices that hurt. It had meals that felt unfair. It had people who gave too much and people who took too much. It had silence after conflict. It had jealousy near the fire. It had fear of being left out. It had the tired patience of those who kept caring even when care was heavy. But it also had repair. It had the return of someone after anger cooled. It had food placed into a waiting hand. It had children learning the sound of trusted voices. It had stories that carried warnings through the dark. It had laughter that softened pride. It had distance when closeness became too sharp. It had memory, not only as punishment, but as a way of saying that actions matter. The early group endured because it was able, at least sometimes, to hold contradiction. People could need one another and resent one another. They could be afraid of the outside world and still feel wounded by the inside world. They could want freedom and still return to the same fire. This is not a simple story of ancient harmony. It is a story of difficult dependence, and that may be the more truthful lesson. Human togetherness was not built only from love. It was built from need, risk, memory, care, fear, restraint, and the slow discovery that no one body can carry the whole world alone. In the end, the early group was a fragile answer to a problem that never fully disappeared. How can beings with hunger, pride, fear, and pain remain close enough to help one another? How can a circle survive when every person inside it is capable of both care and harm? Early humans did not solve this forever. They practiced it. They practiced it in the sharing of food, in the watching of children, in the lowering of dangerous pride, in the telling of stories, in the cooling of conflict, and in the quiet choice to come back after distance. Some groups failed, some bonds broke, some people were lost. But enough groups held together for long enough that we are here now, still carrying the same old question in different forms. We live under different roofs, with different tools, different laws, different languages, and different fears. Yet somewhere beneath all of it, the ancient fire is still recognizable. It appears whenever people try to share fairly, whenever someone protects a child who is not only theirs, whenever a community remembers harm but still leaves room for repair, whenever power is limited before it becomes cruelty, whenever someone chooses not to leave too quickly. The first human groups did not give us a perfect model to copy. They gave us a humbler truth. Staying together has always required effort. It has always required people to notice the fragile space between need and resentment, between memory and forgiveness, between belonging and control. And maybe, as the night grows quiet, the question is not only what kept early human groups from falling apart. Maybe the question is what still keeps any human circle from falling apart, when every heart inside it has reasons to stay and reasons to walk away.